This video is going to demonstrate how to graph reciprocals of functions. Before we begin graphing, we need to know about some special relationships that are going to help us find points upon this graph that we can think about. The first relationship we want to think about is when you have a value of 0, the reciprocal is 1 over 0. Now that's an impossible thing to do. You can't divide by 0, and it's an indication that at this point where the graph is 0, its reciprocal graph will have an asymptote. Now, the graphs we have right now do have some asymptotes. It's these dotted lines, and you can see that this graph is trying to approach the asymptote into the negatives on this direction. From over here, it's trying to approach the asymptote from the positive direction. I also have an asymptote where from both directions we're approaching it negatively. Just as 0 has a reciprocal of 1 over 0, reciprocals work in the other direction as well. So if you see an asymptote, the reciprocal will have a value of 0. Another important moment to notice is that when you have a value of 1, the reciprocal will be 1 over 1, which is also 1. The same goes for negative 1. 1 over negative 1 is negative 1. So 1s and negative 1s have reciprocals that are exactly the same. Another thing we should be aware of is certain zones. One zone I want to talk about is when numbers are between 0 and 1. So these are all fractions, rational numbers, and irrational numbers that are somehow between 0 and 1. If you put those in a reciprocal form, so 1 over a fraction, it creates a number that is larger than 1. So let's just think about that for a second. What if I have 1/2? Well, 1 over a half is 2. It is. It's larger than 1. This also works with negative 1. So in the zone between negative 1 and 0, doing the reciprocal of that will create numbers that are less than negative 1 and by magnitude greater than negative 1. What I mean by that is up in this graph, here's the zone between 0 and 1, and here are values that exist there. In the reciprocal form, these are going to be values greater than 1. All right, and the same with the negatives. Between 0 and negative 1, it's within this zone. The reciprocal will have those values less than negative 1, or you can think of it as more negative than negative 1. This also works in the reverse. So if my function is less than negative 1, the reciprocal will have those values between 0 and negative 1. And if my function is greater than 1, the reciprocal is going to exist between 0 and 1. So when I graph, I look for these moments, and I use them to make sense of what's happening. So the first moments I look for are, where is my graph 0? Because I know it's going to turn into an asymptote. So follow along this graph, and I reach 0 at this point. So my reciprocal graph will have an asymptote in that same location. All right, continue to look at this graph, following along, and then I reach an asymptote here. So at that location in my reciprocal graph, I'll have a 0. Remember, that comes from this relationship. Zeros and asymptotes are reciprocally related. Continue to follow along. I hit a 0 right there, which means in my reciprocal graph I will have an asymptote. And at this point I have an asymptote, so in my reciprocal graph I'll have a 0. So that took care of my zeros and asymptotes. Next I'm going to look for 1s and negative 1s, because in the reciprocal they remain 1 and negative 1. So this graph certainly starts out with a 1. The reciprocal will be a 1 in the same location. Keep following it down. I have negative 1 at the bottom of this bend right here. So at that location I will also have negative 1 in the reciprocal graph. I kind of bend up And then I come back to -1 right there. See how it's lined up with -1. So I will also have a -1 in my graph, right? My reciprocal graph at the same location. Following the graph, I have a 1 right here. So reciprocal is also 1 in that location. I bend up greater than 1, and I come back to 1 right there. So the reciprocal will also have a 1. And I have a -1 at the very end. Lines up with -1 right there. So at the very end of my reciprocal, I'll also have a -1. So I can kind of see the pattern with my locations dotted out now. Something's going to happen. There's going to be a bend down or a bend up. I know that these dots will be connected in some sort of way, and something about this as well. So I'm trying to see where the bends go. I just need to think about them a little bit more deeply to know indeed exactly in which direction they're bending or curving. So I'm going to start with this zone right here, which was my 1 to 0 zone in the original function. Notice all of these values are between 0 and 1. And when things are between 0 and 1, the reciprocal should be larger than 1. So I should be having a bend that approaches an asymptote with values that are all larger than 1. All right, we've got 0 right there. Well, from this 0 to this -1, which is this asymptote to this -1, I'm in the zone that's between 0 and -1. And in the zone between 0 and -1, the reciprocal is numbers that are less than 1, or another way of thinking about it, more -1. More negative than -1. So all of this should be more negative than -1, which is this area. I've reached -1, and all of a sudden, I am in the zone that comes back. All right, so I've gone and I've reached -1, and I'm still in this zone that is between 0 and -1, which means I should still be in a zone that is more negative than -1. And I need to come back and approach -1 because I'm going to hit -1 again. All right, so let's think about that one more time. These are numbers more negative than -1. I get to -1, and then I'm back into numbers that are more negative than -1 until I come back to -1. So did I do that? Yep. More negative than -1, hit -1, come back into that more negative than -1, and then back to -1. Now, this zone is numbers that are more negative than -1, which is right here. It's telling me I should get into this zone that's from -1 to 0. And in fact, I should be coming up to a 0, and I should be touching it right there, just like this. All right. Once I've hit that asymptote, which is a 0, I'm looking at these numbers. Well, now I'm in the positives. I'm in numbers that are greater than 1, which means numbers that are less than 1, and greater than 0 in the reciprocal. I should be coming up to here. I get to 1, and I never go past 1. I'm still in this zone of numbers that are greater than 1. So that reciprocal is still in the zone of numbers less than 1. Until I come back to 1, in which case I then drop into numbers that are between 0 and 1. So I should be in numbers that are greater than 1. And that takes me to this moment right here, the 0, which is the asymptote in the reciprocal. Now looking at here, I'm in the negatives, and we saw this earlier, this same exact situation. Crossing 0, going into the negatives, crossing 0, going into the negatives. In the reciprocal, when I crossed 0 and went into the negatives, I had this bend up, and then I started way down here and came up. I'm going to do that same thing here. I should start from down below and find myself getting to the 0, which was this asymptote right here. When I'm here, look across the asymptote and you can see that these are numbers that are more negative than -1, which in the reciprocal says that I should be in negative numbers that are between 0 and -1. Touch 0 for just a moment at the asymptote, but then it continued to stay negatives, and actually I come down in this direction right here. And I eventually reach my -1, which is where I want it to be at the very end. So this is the reciprocal graph. There are some other things that you can notice within this graph. Reciprocals tend to flip curves, but there's a shift involved as well. So it's not as simple as saying, I'm going to take this and flip it within the same zone. What we're doing is I take this and I'm flipping it, but with 1 as the anchor. So it's as if I were to take this and spin it around 1. It spins so that it's now opening upwards. Same with this one. This was you kind of see this as a cup that's opening up. In the reciprocal, it's opening down instead. And again, it has that anchor of -1. And then we have a cup opening down. Right here, it should be opening up. And opening up all the way until we get to the asymptote and all the way until we get to 0 in the reciprocal. Same thing happens here. This was a cup opening up. It's a cup opening down, anchored at 1. Switch to opening down, switch to opening up, with an anchor at 1 again. And then keep shooting in that direction until you get to 0, which is an asymptote.